Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today as I review and talk about the 2022 film, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by David Blue Garcia and starring Elsie Fisher. And before I start talking about this movie, which I thought was decent, I want to talk a little bit about my experiences with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise as being a big horror fan. Of course, I've seen some of these movies. The original movie, directed by Tobe Hooper, is probably my favorite horror film of all time. I don't know if I've ever mentioned that on my channel before or not. It's just got an atmosphere and an intensity that I feel like is still unmatched in horror. They've tried to imitate it many times, but it's just never worked the same, in my opinion. And although that movie admittedly doesn't have a great plot or anything, I've just always loved it. I have seen Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, but it was a long time ago, but I remember it being pretty decent. And because I loved the original film so much, I was always hesitant to watch the Jessica Biel remake, but finally I did a few years ago, and I really didn't like it at all. It's one of my least favorite horror movies ever. I thought it was a complete failure on every level. I know a lot of people love that film, but nothing about it worked for me. I thought they tried way too hard to copy the original, and although Biel's performance was decent, the film just fell flat for me. So that kind of turned me off from watching any of the other modern Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies. But I happened to see a trailer for this one on Netflix. This is a Netflix film, and thought it looked decent, so I thought I would give it a shot. So I was kind of looking forward to this movie, as Netflix has done a decent amount of build-up on it. So what did I think of this 2022 version? I thought it was pretty decent overall. I thought parts of it worked, parts of it didn't work. But overall, I thought the film was entertaining. So the basic plot of this movie, it is kind of a loose sequel to the original. They bring back a character from the original films. Basically, this group of young people decide they're going to reopen a town. And of course, there's some people lurking there who maybe shouldn't be, at least as far as these young people are concerned. And that's pretty much the plot of this movie. Honestly, none of these Texas Chainsaw movies have great plots. Now, I will say I really appreciate that this film's only I think 83 minutes long. I really appreciate when they make a film this length. The film didn't need to be any longer, so don't make it any longer. And I thought this movie was paced pretty well for this type of horror film. The gore effects are amazing. If you like gore fest, this is the goriest movie I've seen in a while. And it kind of reminds me of those 80s horror films and how gory it is. This is definitely more of a slasher than the other Texas Chainsaw movies I've seen. And the body count is pretty high. So if that's your thing, I think you'll at least enjoy the carnage in this movie. Especially, there's a really over-the-top bus scene, which is so silly and ludicrous, but filled with carnage that it was kind of enjoyable to watch. The acting is decent for this kind of film. It's not great. I don't even think it's as good as the acting in some of the other Texas Chainsaw movies, but it's not terrible, and it's adequate. There are a few really good scenes in this movie that do have a creepy mood to them. I say creepy, but not intense, which is my problem with the film, which I'll get to in a minute. But overall, I thought the film was entertaining, and the ending was pretty cool, and I just kind of enjoyed it as an entertaining movie overall. However, I do think there are some key things that hold this film back. First of all, I say it's a loose sequel to the original, and I have no problem with them bringing back a character from the original. However, I do feel that this part of the plot could have been developed more. If you're going to make all these nods to the original, I thought that part of the plot needed a lot more build-up than what it was given. So I thought in that way the plot was kind of poor and didn't totally hold weight as a sequel. I think this film works better if you take it as its own film instead of trying to connect it to the original movie, if that makes sense. Another thing I have an issue with in this film is that a lot of the characters do not always make smart decisions, which is a problem in horror movies like this, but it's to be expected, so it's not too big of a deal. It's not terrible. I've seen worse. My biggest issue with this movie is that it does still lack the intensity of the original. Although it's creepy and has a decent mood and some of the cinematography is pretty cool, it still just doesn't have that raw intensity that the original film had. I feel like the original is a movie you kind of feel as you watch it. And this one, although I'm like, yeah, that is a little creepy and disturbing, it doesn't really stick with you in the same way, if that makes sense. I think intensity is the right word. But overall, despite the plot having some issues, which hurts the film, and it not having that intensity, I do think just as a slasher to entertain you for almost an hour and a half, I think the movie works, and I think the score is pretty good as well. Like I said, the acting's okay. So overall, I would recommend this movie if you're just watching it on its own. But if you're expecting a great sequel to the original, then you might not enjoy this movie as much. So overall, I thought this movie was certainly better than the Jessica Biel remake, but nowhere near as good as the original. So that'll do it for my review of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the 2022 version. If you've seen this film or are interested in any of the Texas Chainsaw movies, you can leave me a comment and let me know if any of the other sequels are worth watching. As always, thanks for watching.